Buenas noches. Me encuentro con Bob Jessop. Bob Jessop es profesor distinguido de sociología de la Universidad de Lancaster y uno de los académicos más importantes a nivel global sobre teorías del Estado, sociología política y economía política. Bob, how are you?
I'm feeling fine, thank you very much. I've survived the jet lag, 2 days of intensive discussion, and feeling enthusiastic and wanting to work more.
That's great to hear. Let's start with a simple question or a touristy question. Have you liked Quito?
It's my first visit. We did a little bit of research before we came and heard that it was the first UNESCO World Heritage City. We visited Krakow in the past, which was the second, and we were very interested in comparing Quito and Krakow. And Quito wins hands down in terms of its ancient appearance and the beauty, the integrity of the city centre. So we're going away with very fond memories and looking forward to a day in Old Quito tomorrow.
That's great to hear. And now talking about the conference, tell us what your experience has been. What's your evaluation of the conference? What have you learned? What is there to for you to know?
I received many invitations to conferences, and I have to turn most of them down. I accepted this one because it was an intriguing topic, something I know about the state, something I'm less familiar with, the southern perspective, and dealing with states with which I'm not very familiar at all, Latin America. So it was an intriguing opportunity to engage with some very interesting scholars, experts in the area, engaging both with state theory and also alternative perspectives. And I think I've taken a great deal away. I hope I've also contributed something as well. And I look forward to cooperating with the two people here, you, Esteban, and Pablo Andrade, in future, and possibly also with some of the other colleagues here. So I think it's been very stimulating for me. I've been able to give something, but I'm taking a lot back as well.
And indeed, it has been a pleasure to have you here. One last question. You came in your conference yesterday. You were talking about sort of your critical views about the global South perspective on the state. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? And maybe if any of that has changed a little bit in the course of the conference?
No, and that's because of the ambiguity in the meaning of global South. It emerged, I think, at a more grassroots level as a way of rethinking the position of post-colonial or colonized societies in an emerging world after the Soviet Union collapsed. So there's a very strong anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, post-colonialist aspect to it, emphasizing very much the perspectives of the indigenous, of the subalterns, and so forth. But with many of these ideas that emerge from the bottom up, they get captured by the elites and turned to very different purposes. And very often now you see global South is just part of official discourse and is often instrumentalized by elites in the South to promote their interests in South-South trade, South-South dialogue, but to the benefit of the elites. And I think what's been interesting in this conference is that, with rare exceptions, the view has been more the original bottom-up anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist perspective here. So I think it's reinforced my view that there is a tension or an ambivalence or a contradiction at the heart of the idea of the global South. We can also look at what happens when you take the viewpoint of subaltern or indigenous peoples. So the paper on Bolivia, for example, which has an indigenous perspective, or the viewpoint in relation to Mexico of how would you view the state in terms of the mafia and its impact on people. So I think I've taken away the idea that there are many different standpoints one can take that could be subsumed under the idea of a Southern perspective, but there isn't a single homogeneous Southern perspective. There is a plurality of Southern perspectives, some of which serve the interests of power and some of which hope to talk truth to power as the basis of criticism. So I think I came here a little skeptical about Southern perspectives. I've not changed my mind about its recontextualization, its appropriation by elites, but I've seen there is still a very lively, heterogeneous, pluralistic set of Southern perspectives that do what I had originally thought that it was intended to do.
And since we're talking about the South, it makes me think of the North. Mm-hmm. And I'd actually like to hear your take on what's going on not only in the United States with Trumpism, and but also about Brexit, the migration crisis, and sort of there seems to be a general feeling of I don't know if despair, or at least anxiety about many of the structures of modernity that are being challenged right now, and some of the responses that we see are people like Trump being elected and so on. So maybe can you discuss that very quickly?
I'm not sociologically inclined to want to put modernity at the center of my analyses. I would prefer to put the logic of global accumulation and its social consequences. So if I look at the United States, the dominance of finance-dominated accumulation of transnational elites has led to the neglect of the local population. They've been able to get away with it for years. So real wages have not risen for almost 35 years in the United States, but costs of education, of healthcare and so forth have gone up. And for a long time, the elites have been able to fool the people. But as they say, you can fool all of the people some of the time.
But not all of the people.
Not all of the people all of the time. And Trump is a response to the growing dissatisfaction with the two major political parties, which are really both wings, a left wing and a right wing of capital. And he's been able to appeal to populist discontent in order to come to power. But already people are being very disappointed with what he's doing. Many of his proposals, medical care, the poorest people would have lost most, and it would have financed tax cuts for the billionaires. They're now still trying to introduce tax cuts that will benefit the billionaires, not the people at the bottom. Migration is something ill thought through. Even many fractions of capital say we need our Indians in Silicon Valley, we need our doctors in the health service, and they come from abroad. And so I think what we can do is to see Trump as somebody riding populist resentment about the impact of financialization, export of jobs, etc., but not somebody who's actually got an answer to anybody's problems. And I think it would have been much nicer to see Bernie Sanders come in, but he was outmaneuvered by the Democratic Party. In relation to Brexit, I think here is a very similar problem, that we're increasingly integrated into the European Union. We take more and more migrants. Why? Because they provide very cheap labor. And capital, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, were very happy to have more and more migrants. But in a neoliberal context, they never improved education. They never spent money on the health service. We have a massive housing crisis. And so Brexit is a reaction superficially to migration, but fundamentally it's the failure of a neoliberal government committed to reduced public spending, to invest in the infrastructure, the education structure, the housing and so forth. And I've described Brexit as a referendum on the wrong issue. The referendum was on in Europe or out of Europe. The referendum should have been with neoliberalism or against neoliberalism. The crisis was produced by neoliberalism. Now we're leaving Brexit. The response is more austerity because Brexit's going to be bad for the economy. So we have to cut public expenditure in order to have a fighting fund when things get bad. And so neoliberalism produced the referendum result. Neoliberalism is the answer to preparing for Brexit and an uncertain future. And the ordinary voter did not understand that the problem was neoliberalism because the right-wing press has always presented it in terms of migration as a sort of deception, a maneuver, a distraction. So I would see neoliberalism not as the fundamental cause, but an absolutely major context in which rather different political dynamics have played themselves out in the United States, in Britain, and within Europe more generally. What happened in Britain is not confined to Britain. You see the same problems in the Netherlands with the Wilder. You see it elsewhere as well. So it's a general problem and not one confined to Britain or to the United States.
Professor Jessop.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
My pleasure.
Hemos charlado con el profesor Bob Jessop de la Universidad de Lancaster. Muchas gracias.